Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, we are going to be walking you through an exciting new resource, the Guidebook on Accessory Dwelling Units, or ADUs in Evanston, which was just launched. This webinar and the associated guidebook were produced in collaboration between the City of Evanston and the Evanston Development Cooperative, or EDC, and are designed to serve as resources for folks who are interested in potentially pursuing the development of an ADU on your property. So we're going to spend this hour going into detail about what you can find in the guidebook, but don't worry about memorizing anything today. We're recording this webinar and we'll be posting it to the city's website and YouTube channel. And the guidebook is available both on the city website and EDC's website for you to peruse on your own time. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to start tonight off by explaining what an ADU is and let you all know of recent changes made to regulations in Evanston that make it easier than ever to develop an ADU on your property. We are then going to run through the different types of ADUs that you might want to consider building based on a couple of things, based on what your property looks like, your budget, and your vision for what the space could look like. And then Robbie is going to run through some important regulations to know about that are going to be helpful to consider in the early stages of your project. He's going to introduce potential costs and options for financing your ADU. We're then going to look at what a typical process for developing an ADU in Evanston looks like, and we'll wrap up by showing you a couple of the pages of the guidebook, a little sneak preview, let you know where you can find this resource and the recording. And then we will open things up to you all and answer any questions that you might have. So throughout the presentation, if you have a question, feel free to use the Q&A function and submit your question there, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. Before we dive in, we're going to just take a minute to introduce ourselves. Like I said, this guidebook and webinar were developed through a partnership between the City of Evanston and EDC. My name is Megan Gibson. I'm a housing and economic development analyst with the city, and I'm joined today by Robbie Marcus. Robbie, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi there, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Robbie Marcus. I'm a vice president and worker owner of the Evanston Development Cooperative. EDC designs and builds energy efficient housing for Evanston homeowners and residents with a focus on accessory dwelling units, with organizational commitments to housing affordability, an inclusive and democratic economy, and racial justice.
Great, thanks, Robbie. So let's get started. What is an ADU? An accessory dwelling unit is a small independent housing unit on the same lot as a standard size residence with a kitchen, bathroom, and areas for living and sleeping. ADUs can be either attached or detached from your primary residence and can be either converted within an existing structure or completely new construction. ADUs can serve as a home for family members, as a space to downsize, to house your home business, or as a source of rental income. These are just a few of many uses, and we'll touch on a couple more of those throughout this presentation. But tonight, we're really hoping to highlight the many ways that ADUs can keep in touch with your living needs over time. You might have heard the term coach house or carriage house. We just want to point out as we go into this that these are types of ADUs. So when you hear those terms, you know what we're talking about. And before we move on, I want to briefly highlight here that the city really sees ADUs as one approach to keeping up with the community's changing housing needs. And in that spirit, we are continuing to update regulations to increase the flexibility and ease involved in developing an ADU on your property. So the most recent regulation update I want to highlight is that as of September 2020, the definition of an ADU now includes internal and attached ADUs and detached structures that do not have parking spaces, which is really exciting and makes things easier than ever for folks who are interested in developing an ADU. The city is going to continue to revisit these regulations and make sure that we're keeping up with best practices and making the process more flexible and suited to the diversity of needs people have for their homes and their properties. So tonight's webinar and the guidebook itself can serve as the first step in figuring out how to move forward with the investment to build an ADU. It will cover zoning rules, building codes, utility requirements, and will hopefully help you determine which option is right for you and your family. Next slide, please. So why consider an ADU? ADUs are versatile and flexible. They are able to serve you and your family in a variety of different capacities over long periods of time. So by building an ADU on your property, you're also helping your community address a housing shortage. We see this as a win-win, where what's good for you and your family is also good for your community. ADUs are associated with a variety of common uses, even beyond what is depicted in this infographic here. But the most common types include spaces for intergenerational living, for downsizing, or for aging parents to be able to stay where they are. It's used for rental income, a home for family members like adult children, relatives with disabilities, and for your home business or your home office. Next slide. So as we know, there are multiple types of ADUs, as I mentioned before, that are able to be built in Evanston, including some new ones. Choosing the right type of ADU to build for you and your family is going to depend on a lot of factors, including what your existing property looks like, the space that's available, your budget, and what you're looking to get out of your own personal ADU. Next slide. We are going to briefly run through each possible type of ADU, the ones shown here, how each different one is suited to different needs and property types. There are these 5 main types. And as we look through these, just keep in mind that just to decipher the legend for you, the ADU is represented by the little white graphic with the large blue house denoting your primary residence, and the smaller blue building is your existing garage. And this bears just quick repeating. It might be helpful to keep in mind as we run through these different types that for all of these options, you need to maintain or replace the existing parking on your property, but there is no additional parking required for an ADU. Next slide. Okay, so the first type we're going to discuss tonight is the detached ADU. These are independent from your primary residence, so they are separate structures without parking. They have to be less than 1,000 square feet of livable space, smaller than your primary residence, and they can be up to 2 stories tall. Detached ADUs are most often used for aging parents who maybe want a place where the master bedroom is on the ground floor so that stairs aren't an issue, or simply for folks who want to downsize. And these are really great for if you want privacy or separation from the main residence, or maybe have some extra space on your property. Next slide. Great. The next type is a garage conversion, which is a rehabilitation of your existing garage into a livable space. So this new dwelling unit has to have at least one exterior door that meets egress requirements. It has to meet all building energy, fire code requirements, such as minimum insulation standards, which your garage might not necessarily be equipped with as of right now. These types of ADUs are often used for home businesses or home offices, as we're all seeing is helpful in a pandemic. Best if you don't want to create an additional structure on your property, if you can fit parking elsewhere on your property or when you're on a budget. Next slide. This next type of ADU is an attached ADU, attached to your main house. So this could be a 1 or 2 story addition to your main residence, and again, has to be less than 1,000 square feet of livable space and smaller than the primary residence. Attached ADUs can't exceed the height allowed in your underlying zoning district, so that's something to be aware of when you go into this process. And there can only be one entrance on the front-facing side of your property. So there must be a separate entrance for the ADU, and any exterior stairs are going to have to be on either the rear or the side of the property. We see these really often being used for adult children, home businesses, and they're really great if you don't want to alter or tear down your existing garage, or if you don't have a space to convert inside your main residence. Okay, next slide. A garage attached ADU is an addition to your existing garage, exactly what it sounds like. So this addition can be 1 or 2 stories. It can be either adjacent to or on top of your existing garage. This type of ADU has to be, again, less than 1,000 square feet of livable space, not including existing garage, excuse me. And we often see these for, again, aging parents, for downsizing, and they're really great, again, if you want privacy or separation from the main residence, if you don't want to tear down your existing garage, if you have space next to your existing garage, or if you want to preserve backyard space by building above your garage and saving some space in that way. Just a quick tip on this one. If you are considering creating an ADU over your garage, it's worth speaking with a professional about your existing concrete foundation, because based on the structural strength of the foundation that's existing in your garage, you may need to tear down the entire thing and build a new two-story structure, which of course would have implications on project cost and timeline. So something to keep in mind. Next slide. Oh, great. Our last type of ADU that we're going to go over is an interior ADU. So this is a conversion of part of your existing primary residence into a dwelling unit. This could be a basement on an upper floor or any other space in your residence with its own kitchen and its own bathroom facilities. It's going to, again, have to be smaller than the floor area of the primary residence. And we see these as often being used for rental income, or if you have unused space in your residence, if you're on a budget and can't build more based on your lot coverage, or if you simply want to, again, preserve yard space. So with that, I'm going to pause here and remind folks that if you have any questions, feel free to submit them using the Q&A function, and we'll be happy to answer once we get to that section of the presentation. But for now, I'm going to hand this over to Robbie.
Great, thank you so much, Megan. So getting into some of the more technical zoning regulations that affect what you can actually build on your property. What I'm going to start with are zoning districts. Those are really the biggest factor. There are 6 residential zoning districts in Evanston, as you'll see here, ranging from R1 to R6. You can build an ADU in any of these residential zoning districts, but what you can build depends on your property and your zoning district. So based on the zoning district, the 2 key regulations that change are building lot coverage and impervious surface coverage. So building lot coverage is the percentage of your property taken up by buildings. And impervious surface is the percentage taken up by hard surfaces. So that includes rooftops, but that also includes brick, asphalt, or concrete pavement or driveway. And impervious surface regulation helps ensure that there is appropriate stormwater runoff to have enough green space to soak up water and mitigate the risk of urban flooding. As you'll see here, R3 allows for a little bit more density than R2, and the same goes for R2 compared to R1. Lastly, I'm going to flag it now, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later on, but historic districts and landmark properties will also affect what you can build in Evanston. It's important to know if your property is in a historic district or if your property is landmarked. You can look up both of these, your zoning district and whether you're in a historic district through Evanston 311 My Place. A quick Google search with that term on the slide, Evanston 311 About My Place, should help you find this free City of Evanston tool. So moving on, the next key regulation related to accessory dwelling units are called setbacks. These are the distances which structures, both primary residences as well as accessory structures in backyards, need to be from property lines, streets, and other buildings. So to break this chart down a little bit, if you're building an attached or interior accessory dwelling unit, anything that's part of or connected to your main residence, then the principal structure setbacks, which you'll see here, apply. So if you were to, add on to your existing house and that attached ADU would be connected to your main house, then your primary residence with your attached ADU, say for R1 to R3 districts, would need to be 27 feet from the front yard lot line, 15 feet from the street side yard lot line, 5 feet from an interior yard lot line, and 30 feet from the rear yard lot line. Transitioning to anything that's accessory in the backyard, a garage attachment, a detached accessory dwelling unit, or a garage conversion, I chopped out the section of the setbacks regulations that apply to these structures. So the accessory structure setbacks for rear yards apply here. So in these cases, the ADU has to be 3 feet from all side and rear property lines. And if you're on a corner lot, there are some exceptions, but your structure also has to be 10 feet from the primary residence. No ADU can be closer to the street side lot line if you're on a corner lot or the front lot line than the principal structure. And if you do have a corner lot, as you can see in this graph, the ADU needs to be 15 feet from the lot line abutting the street. If you have more questions about setbacks, people often do, the Q&A is a good time to bring those up. Transitioning into costs, when aiming to try to figure out how much your ADU will cost, the short answer is that it really depends on the project you have in mind. There are a number of factors that affect the price of construction, and there is a detailed breakdown, which you can see here in this slide, in the guidebook of potential expenses. That said, here are some of the primary takeaways to consider when it comes to cost. When you're working to convert your existing footprint, like a basement, an attic of your primary residence, or even your garage, that is typically going to be less expensive than an addition or new construction in your backyard. You can think about it in terms of working within your existing infrastructure. So maybe some of those items that are necessary for new construction may already be in the building footprint if you're doing a conversion or a rehab. With a new dwelling structure in Evanston, one of the reasons that the cost can be higher for those is that you need to add a fire sprinkler suppression system for new dwelling structures in Evanston. So this sprinkler system, along with a new kitchen and bathroom in a full ADU in your backyard, can often require you to upgrade the water service for the entire property, not just the accessory dwelling unit, and that can affect the cost. Moving on, one-story structures tend to cost less than two-story structures. One reason for this, which we're happy to explain further in the Q&A, is that you may not need the same type of foundation depth for a one-story structure when compared to a two-story structure. And another example of how 1 and 2 stories can affect cost is, in addition to the cost of appropriate structural systems for 2-story structures, we've run into projects where we need to relocate the electric lines on one side of the property in order to meet separation requirements between a 2-story ADU and power lines. We also have smaller 1-story ADU projects that don't set off these types of issues and don't have that cost. Lastly, what I'll note here is that being in a historic district can add time and or cost to design and construction. It can take up more of the architect's time to design an ADU in a historic district when compared to a typical ADU. And an ADU in a historic district can also potentially require more expensive construction materials or methods. So the last and probably most important thing to communicate on this slide is that it's really valuable to figure out and communicate, as Megan said, both your criteria for your project and your budget early on, and communicate this to a trusted professional. It's smart to ask questions early on about how certain changes to the project or the scope of design would affect the budget, as that can help you decide whether you want to proceed with a certain feature or layout for the accessory dwelling unit. And the design phase is really the right time to figure those things out. Ideally, you want to collaborate to arrive at a project that fits both your living needs and your budget. So then transitioning into financing, because of the cost of the unit, some people do end up pursuing financing options to help pay for their ADU. The options listed here are the 3 most common methods to finance an ADU, and they are sometimes paired with savings. I'll also note that there is no one right way to finance an ADU. To start, we often recommend talking with your current mortgage holder or a trusted financial advisor to figure out your options. Getting into these 3 bullet points here, the first option is a home equity line of credit, or a HELOC. And this is what's known as a second mortgage on your property. So it exists in addition to your primary mortgage. Somewhat like a credit card, it functions as a revolving line of credit that you can draw on whenever you want. And the amount for that line of credit is based on the equity in your house. And you could utilize that line of credit to pay for an accessory dwelling unit. The last two options here, a cash out refinance mortgage and a renovation mortgage, are both first or primary mortgages. With a cash out refinance mortgage, you convert a portion of the existing equity in your house into cash, and then you start a new mortgage with a higher principal balance due on the mortgage because you pulled some out in cash to, in this case, pay for the construction of the ADU. And lastly, with a renovation mortgage, you can borrow with the goal of doing a renovation on your property, in this case, an ADU. So when determining the loan, the lender actually looks at your architect's ADU permit set and assesses the value of your property after construction of the ADU, which can affect how much you can borrow. For borrowers with less existing equity in your house, the renovation mortgage can sometimes be the best way to access an accessory dwelling unit. The last thing I'll note on this slide is that if you have a duplex, it's really important to talk with lenders about this early. Most of the loan products I've talked about here are geared towards single family homes, and the loan products are quite different for duplexes or two flats. So then transitioning into the process for a property owner or a homeowner of building an ADU, the first thing I want to note here is the importance of figuring out your criteria for early on, just getting all of the stakeholders involved in the project at the same table to think through, why are we taking on this project? What will be the purpose of this structure? When thinking about 2 years from now versus 10 years from now, will it be used for the same reason? What's our ideal budget? Identifying these key details early on can help ensure that the project really does end up making sense for you in the long run. From there, it's valuable to identify a licensed, insured professional architect or design builder that listens to your needs and can work with you to design the unit. If you think it'll be necessary to secure financing, it can be good to start that process early. We found that loan applications, especially, and it does depend on the loan product, can take time and have sometimes delayed architecture work. It makes sense that people don't want to pay an architect for full design plans until you really know that you can afford this project. And so then it also makes sense to start thinking about the financing early on. As you start design, it's valuable to be specific and precise about your living needs and the purpose of your unit. In addition to seeing and reviewing architectural drawings, you may want to ask your architect to put down your key criteria in writing. We've done this on our projects and have found value in having everyone agree on paper on what the end result of the project should be. And then after you receive a building permit, you break ground on construction. The timeline for construction really depends on the unit and whether there are any atypical or irregular construction methods or materials being used, if there are any items that require a long time to get shipped to the project site. But a ballpark range is between 3 to 6 months. And then once the unit is done, you can enjoy your new accessory dwelling unit. So then jumping into the City of Evanston process for an ADU, this is what the City of Evanston looks for to ensure that projects are safe, compliant, and ready to be occupied by residents. The good news is that most projects are by right, meaning that if you follow the zoning regulations detailed in the guide in this presentation, you will most likely not need to get any special use approvals or variances. If that's the case, you apply for a zoning analysis and hopefully the project is determined to be compliant with the zoning code. And here, coming back to historic districts or landmark properties, if your property is in a historic district, for example, you would need to retain a certificate of appropriateness from the city's preservation commission. This can add months to your project, so it's important to plan for it ahead of time. And as I said earlier, flag it right when you can realize it. From there, you apply for and ideally receive a building permit. The timeline for a building permit turnaround depends greatly on the season. If you apply in the winter, you will likely hear back more quickly than an application for building permit in the summer. Once construction starts, there should be inspections by the city of Evanston for electrical, plumbing, and other work. Once your project's done, you apply for a certificate of occupancy and make the most of your new home. Lastly, if you plan to rent out your ADU or utilize it as a home business, you do need to register it for those purposes with the city. And there's more information on how to do this in the guidebook as well as on the city's website. Speaking of the guide, there are several topics and best practices for ADUs, which were not covered in this evening's webinar, that are in the guidebook. Our team has been building this comprehensive 20-page document specific to Evanston's ADU code for most of 2021, and we're excited to release it to the public this week. It is currently on the City of Evanston's website on its accessory dwelling unit page linked here, and it will also be on EDC's website shortly. Additionally, EDC will share it on social media via Facebook and Twitter in the next 24 hours, and a copy of this webinar will also be posted on both the City and EDC's YouTube channels. So from there, I'm going to turn it over to Megan to answer questions from this presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Robbie. So yeah, as a reminder, a recording of this webinar is going to be posted online at those same URLs that Robbie just pointed out, along with the guidebook itself and a pretty robust set of FAQs that we have developed over the course of producing this guidebook. But for now, let's turn to our question and answer section of the presentation. Joining us tonight is Dick Coe from the Evanston Development Cooperative, who is a subject matter expert on many of the more technical aspects of ADU development. Thank you for being here, Dick. So to start us off, maybe you could answer our first question, which is, does construction of an ADU relax the permeable ground requirement?
Great, thank you, Megan. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And first, congratulate you and Rob for just delivering just an awesome presentation, and also city staff, both present and past city staff. I see on the attendees list of this ADU code, and this guide is really many years of hard work. So congratulations to the whole team. Okay, so the first question on, does it relax the permeable ground requirement? And the short answer is it does not. What the city did do in September of 2020 is to relax the open air parking, how that counts towards building lot coverage. So the permeable surfaces still go by the underlying zoning district. So that goes with the chart that Robbie showed, whether you're in R1 or R3, you need to make sure that when you calculate the surface area of your driveway, buildings, garages, or ADUs, you stay within that limit. And that's important because of just stormwater management. If you need to go beyond the building lot coverage allowance, you can ask for a zoning variance. So that's something that one could pursue, but the ADU does not relax the code.
Great, thank you, Dick. Maybe this next question can go to you, Robbie. Does an ADU have to have a private entry, or if it's in a basement, for example, can you enter through the main house?
So I'll turn that to Dick, actually.
I'll take it. Yeah, so it really depends what you want to do with that unit, whether it's for a family member to live in there, so sharing entryway is okay. But again, it has to meet the building code requirements for egress, whether if there's a bedroom in the basement, it has to meet the minimum square feet for the window size and minimum clearance. And those are for safety reasons that even as we relax the ADU code, we need to make sure we keep the occupants safe. So does it need to have a private entry? My understanding is it does not. But then again, as you go into who would rent it or live in it, that becomes a question of how you want to design the space and have access to the different parts of the building.
Great, thank you very much. Robbie, let me try you on this one. What are the tax implications that impact homeowners who build an ADU? Is there any information about how much this will cost on the tax side?
Yeah, so we have tried to get to the bottom of this question multiple times, and the short answer is we don't have a great answer. We do know property taxes will go up in some capacity. More so if you're adding a separate detached accessory dwelling unit to your backyard. from the Cook County assessor's perspective, if you build a detached accessory dwelling unit in your backyard, I think they classify it, I would need to I think, Dick, is it 2-06? Is that correct? What the
I think so, yeah.
classification is? It's the classification for a small single family residential. And so what you actually do is you have 2 pins on the property. That's correct, Dick, right?
Correct.
Yeah, you have 2 pins on
Or
the
sorry, one pin, but 2 class codes.
Yeah. Thank you. One pin. So there's no sort of property tax split for the entire property, but 2 class codes. And if you're, yeah, I think based on conversations, just trying to gather this information that we've had with the Cook County Assessor's Office, I think this is still a very new topic for them. And what we also know is that there aren't really enough accessory dwelling units in Evanston yet to be able to statistically estimate just what would the average increase in property taxes be. So it's still to some degree too early to tell.
Great. Thank you so much. Dick, let's go to you for this one. Can an ADU be split off from the main dwelling and mortgaged or sold separately, either before or after completion?
Under Evanston's current ADU ordinance, the answer is no. There is a requirement for common ownership between the ADU and the primary residence. So you would not be able to sell the smaller ADU unit separately from the principal structure.
Great. Let me ask you one more related to just like what existing properties might look like. So one person in the audience has a condominium in a 4-unit building. The condo has a full garden apartment under it. And this person has been prevented from renting the garden unit in the past because it was not attached to the unit above it with an interior stair. So they're trying to get at what the definition specifically of what an attached ADU actually is in this situation.
Yeah, it's hard to know all the details, but based on that description, it sounds like this garden unit is now what we would consider an ADU. It's subordinate to the rest of the structure. It's a smaller unit. It's attached. Doesn't really matter if it's attached, under it, next to it. It's really in addition, so that accessory dwelling unit part is now what's legalized. So before you might have been told, hey, I can't rent it out, or you have to sign an affidavit saying you can't rent it out, or you had to even take out a kitchen. We've heard all kinds of stories that now I think the city is saying those units are important for homeowners to have that flexibility to do. So I would imagine, if you approach the city and say, well, here's the unit, how do I make sure it meets, livable standards, whether, how that entryway is laid out and how people, the tenants come in and out, that'll be dependent on who's renting it, what your preferences are. But I would imagine this would fall under an ADU categorization.
Great, thank you. And for this next question, I would love to hear from both of you. The question is, who is currently expressing interest in looking to build an ADU and for what uses? So what are the two of you hearing a lot of? What kinds of ADUs are generating the most interest?
Yeah, maybe Robbie, I'll start and then I'll toss it over to you after.
Yeah, feel free.
Yeah, and I think what I appreciate what you've titled this guide is ADU, like YOU, and I think it really sums it up well. Is most of the homeowners, and we've spoken to almost 150, 160 Evanston homeowners in the last 2 years, and I would say 95, 98% of them are homeowners thinking about just more flexibility. How do I provide housing for an elderly parent if you're a Gen Xer, or if you're a baby boomer?
Yeah.
I want to stay in the community. I can sell my house, but I'm either trading this for the similar thing, because again, people don't build smaller homes anymore, or an apartment or a condo downtown Evanston. So really homeowners who've been here for many years, many decades, wanting to stay in the community, families thinking about adult child, staying home for longer, thinking about children with disabilities, using that space for more independence, or living with their friends in the main house, and then the parents downsize into the ADU. So yeah, I would say absolute majority are homeowners thinking about their family needs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think adding one small note to that when thinking about the effects of the pandemic as well, I agree with everything Dick's saying. And I think one thing I've also noticed is I'm not sure if it's an uptick because these regulations are so new in Evanston, so it's almost tough to tell what the trends were before the pandemic. But we have seen, I think, calls related to ADUs for aging parents as a solution for intergenerational living, especially in light of a lot of the news surrounding institutionalized living care during the pandemic in 2020. People looking for a safer, healthier, more independent option that's very close to family.
That was super helpful. Thank you both for sharing those insights. So to dovetail off that just a little bit, I know you were mentioning, the kind of this family aspect of ADUs, but do you have any sense of, how much interest there is in using ADUs for either long-term rentals or more short-term like Airbnbs, these types of things?
Yeah, Robbie, you want to start first?
Yeah, I would say my thought is of the calls we've gotten, most are for either, most are not for rental, most are either for family or for kind of entrepreneurship, home business, or home office. I think in my mind, some of the people who initially do it for a home business are thinking, oh, maybe 5-10 years down the line, I'll rent this out when I make a life transition. And so perhaps that's part of the thinking. And I can imagine some of these structures being built now for another purpose, being rented out eventually. But at least my thoughts are that in terms of the calls we're getting from most people, they're not for rental. But Dick, if you have anything to add, feel free.
No, I think people do think about, many years down the line, rental would be an option, to know that in 10 years from now, when this initial purpose is done, we could rent it out for 2 to 3 years, or in between, we could do short-term rental. This has gone before City Council here in Evanston, and we continue to allow short-term rental. So I think those are just giving homeowners more flexibility. But again, the absolute majority of homeowners thinking about just how to build it for their family to use. And one thing that I want to note is, in this collaboration with the city of Evanston over the last 2 years, and we've done research, alongside with the city, looking at what other cities and municipalities have done, from Portland, Oregon, to Los Angeles, to Vancouver, Denver, Boston. So really, one of the, what's really exciting for us to see this come to fruition is taking sort of best practices from all these other cities and also tailoring it to what works in Evanston. What we provide that collaboration and talking to hundreds of homeowners and residents and distilling that into something that we hope is very adaptable and usable by homeowners.
Great, thank you both. Robbie, could I get you to toggle back to the previous slide? I've gotten a couple of questions that are asking where we can find these materials. And so if you see on the screen now, you can either find the recording of this webinar is going to be posted along with the guidebook itself. And like I mentioned before, a pretty robust list of FAQs. So those two websites are cityofevanston.org/ADU and evanston.coop, COOP. All right, so to circle back to maybe some of the more technical questions that we're getting from the audience, I'll let one of you take this one. In the R3 district on a lot with an existing duplex structure, how many ADUs are allowed?
1.
Great, very easy answer. Do you want to say anything else, Robbie?
1 per lot across the board.
Perfect.
Either internal or attached versus detached. And I think in special cases where you have an internal ADU, whether it's a basement, and then you're adding a detached ADU, you could apply for a zoning variance if one of them will be used for family use or an out-of-town guest, but there is a process to apply for a zoning variance in those cases.
Great. And Robbie, in your section around the process of developing ADUs, you touched a little bit on timeline. And we're getting one question that is asking a little bit more specifically about attached ADUs or interior ADUs. So I'm thinking if we take out this idea that you have to do completely new construction, will that save on timeline at all?
I would say it's so tough to tell because it always depends on the specifics of the project. I would say generally a conversion should take less time than new construction. I would also welcome Dick's input.
Yeah, I think that's also where, working with a trusted professional is helpful, because you just don't know until you start looking at what's there. Sometimes there are underlying problems that may not be noticeable, or so I think it really depends.
Great. Dick, I would love to ask you this one. Are there alternate building materials for new construction, considering current prices of certain construction materials? And also, when you answer that, do you mind also speaking to what you see as typical costs to do things like moving overhead electrical lines?
Yeah, and something that we talk to Evanston residents and homeowners a lot is an ADU, whether it's internal, attached, or detached. Of course, that's what we focus more on in EDC, detached ADUs. You're in the end looking at a independent unit, right? This is a small apartment that you are investing in, building in your backyard. This isn't an upgraded garage. This is not a souped up garage. So I think categorically, we really need to start thinking about, this unit will need water, sewer, utilities, kitchen, bathroom, plumbing, fire sprinkler, so and moving utility lines. So as we think about how this whole project comes together, it's also really important to think about what I have behind me, our climate action and resilience plan. We really believe for Evanston to be resilient, it's not just housing, but also can we, without paying a premium, with cost competitive materials, techniques, design and build methods to make sure that we have the high performance that our climate action and resiliency plan requires. So with that, it's really looking at how do we achieve higher safety standards, better indoor air quality. And so for us, we use structural insulated panels. We see benefits in being able to spend time to design on a computer, make sure everything is right. And then the wall panels are manufactured in the factory, assembled once in the factory, packed and shipped to site, and we assemble it quickly, reducing construction time, noise on site, and construction debris on site. So for us, that's important because that also gives us the high performance. So allowing us to have our units really thinking about all electric, so we don't need to contribute to carbon emissions from our buildings. And that is much more easily done when you don't just build the same old way with stud frame construction and stuffed insulation, but really using modern technology and materials. And moving overhead lines, I'm assuming this means the service line between the back of the alley to the front house. That's typically in the couple of $1,000s, less than 5 figures. But if you're talking moving the power lines along the alley between the two properties, that gets into the 5 figures, the $20,000 range. So burying the line to get it out of the way is definitely somewhere less than 10,000 in some of the prices we looked at, 5, 6, 7, 8. Again, depending on how long of a run that we have. But one quick note is you want to do that in conjunction with planning out your ADU. You don't want to bury that line and then later on realizing it still cuts through where your foundation needs to go. So you definitely want to think about that together.
Great, thanks so much, Dick. Robbie, we've got a zoning question, so maybe we could toggle back to one of the zoning slides.
Sure.
The question is, we are zoned B1. Can we do an ADU?
The answer is yes, but the setback regulations are different. Dick, do you want to add more to that?
Sorry, I was looking at some of the questions that came in. Sorry, I missed it.
No problem. Oh, go ahead, Robbie.
Yeah, zone B1, can we do an ADU? And I said yes, but the setbacks are different.
Correct. And then once you get to B1, and some are in the T1 near the university, I think those are best to just talk to the city. But I believe it is allowed, an ADU is allowed, but the setbacks could be different. And how they're categorized might be different. Maybe in multifamily or in zoning districts that allow multifamily, maybe the ADU isn't necessarily the only way to think about a separate dwelling unit.
Great. Great. So our next question, could an attached ADU use your construction panels even if the main house is traditional construction?
Yeah, I think, yeah, no, we partner, I saw another question on, modern technology, materials, resources. We're happy to share more of that. And our partner who makes the structural insulated panels, they work on projects all across the country, actually around the world. And there are bump outs, if we want to call it that, where we have additions to the house. But again, it's really important to think holistically. These walls are super insulated, but what is it connected to? So I think as we think about performances of our single family or multifamily units is really knowing your building. So it's important to have an energy performance test done on your house as you think about investing in higher quality materials. What are you connecting it to? Are other parts of the house leaky? It's good to know that so that you don't feel disappointed that we invested all this, but it didn't perform the way we thought it would, not knowing that the attic was not insulated or something else.
Great. Great. This is another interesting question that we've gotten from the audience. So this person has an Evanston address, but utilizes City of Skokie services. Does this new ADU code apply to me?
Never gotten that one before.
That's a good question. I would imagine whichever municipality you go to for a building permit would be the one who has jurisdiction over what gets built. So that's a good question. I don't know the answer.
No problem. And I should say to the audience, if there are questions that we are unable to answer this evening, there are even more resources on the websites that we've been plugging this evening. So please feel free to peruse those at your leisure. Okay, another question we have. If you have an existing ADU, but it was grandfathered not to be rented, can that be changed so that it is now rentable? I'll let either of you take that one.
Yes, you would need to register it if you haven't already as a rental. And Megan, if you have more info on how to register a rental on the city's website, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a link in the guidebook to the registration page for the city of Evanston. Also, if it's a fairly easy thing to navigate just through Google, if you want to just Google Evanston rental registration. But again, yeah, that is one of the FAQs in the guidebook. So feel free to peruse that after this call. Let's see, if you build an extension to your existing house as a guest unit, does the permit process differ or is it still considered an ADU?
So can you repeat the question again?
Yeah.
No problem. So if you build an extension to your existing house as a guest unit, does the permit process differ or is it still considered an ADU?
Still the same in my mind, Dick.
That's my understanding as well. It would be classified as an internal renovation building permit process, and then depending on what is done in that project, whether it's you're adding more water fixtures or I think will trigger different plan reviews.
Great. And I want to quickly share one question that has come up and that we also have answered in our guidebook and in the FAQs, which is, how do I register a new address for my ADU? So, once you've gone through this process and developed your ADU, how do I go about that? So the answer is that you will submit a plan to Public Works showing the main access door along with a letter requesting the address. The city will generate that new address for you, considering the properties in similar blocks. And the new address will be sent to review to multiple divisions across the city. And then after review and approval, the city is going to generate that new address letter that will be circulated to all the concerned parties, including the post office and any other city departments that will need to know that. So I have a couple more pretty technical questions that maybe I'll just float and see if the two of you have any insight for folks in the audience. So the first one is, what is the minimum head height required for a basement ADU, and can plumbing project into that area?
That's a great question, and I actually don't know the answer to that.
No problem. Robbie, did you want to add anything? I'm sorry if I cut you off.
I do not know the answer to that
Okay.
question, so that'd be a good one to put in our FAQ as we keep building it out.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We're happy to look into this and add that to the FAQs. Great. And then another pretty technical specific question is, I have a 50 by 136 foot lot with an existing 2-flat and coach house garage in an R4A zoning district. Can I still do an attached ADU? And so maybe not to put you all on the spot with math, but if you have any just general insights around how to figure that out, that would be great.
Great question. I'm guessing the short answer is yes. R4, just, as we go to the higher R4, R5, R6, you got higher density. So I think assuming the existing 2-flat does not span, cover a lot of the yard. Again, this is completely guessing. But an attached, if there is a coach house or a detached ADU, it depends on if it's being rented out. If you want to convert, do an attached ADU, I think we ran into this situation where you would need a zoning variance to have 2 ADUs on the property, and then you would have to demonstrate that one or the other will be rented out. So I think that's my understanding of the process. If you were to want to add an attached ADU, it would require a zoning variance.
Great.
If the detached ADU, the coach house, is being used as a dwelling unit, that's my understanding.
Great. We just got a pretty fun question that I am looking forward to hearing your thoughts on. Are there any technological advances that you think might make an ADU more viable? Something like a small personal elevator comes to mind, but is there anything else? And I would love to just add my own question to that, which is, I would love for you all to speak a little bit just about how ADUs can speak specifically to needs of accessibility, sustainability, these types of things. Would love to hear that from you both.
Yeah. I mean, from an accessibility perspective, a lot of these code changes that were passed, I think Dick can touch on sustainability. He knows that world better than me. But for accessibility, a lot of these code changes that were passed in September 2020 really take a meaningful step towards accessibility. The primary thing is, as Dick was saying, by allowing for you to have, as you see in some of these graphics, maybe a parking pad and then a detached ADU elsewhere on the property, that can really facilitate ground level structures that maybe weren't as feasible in the prior ADU code, where if you were doing something new in the backyard, it would need to be 2 stories. And so that's one big step forward in terms of accessibility. We also see, from a design perspective, people think about wider hallways. We've heard folks talk to us about chair ramps if they are thinking about 2 stories, walk-in showers, no bathtubs, and so forth. And Dick, if you have anything to add on accessibility or want to jump into sustainability, feel free.
And I can highlight it enough that outdoor open air parking no longer count towards our building lot coverage, because I think when we think of coach houses, we think of living unit above a 2-3 car garage, and a lot of that was driven by zoning code saying you can't move that parking space outside of a structure, so the only way to go was up, and that created the quote unquote coach house that we have in our minds. But that has now been relaxed significantly, so a homeowner can choose what I like to call housing for people or housing for cars, and depending on the situation, there could be a need for garage parking, or there could be more need for housing for a loved one. And so that gives us the opportunity, the homeowners, the opportunity to make that decision and put a car off the street, but on their lot, but outside, and not be counted towards building lot coverage. And in terms of technological advances that help with ADUs, I think with new construction, it's always good to think about performance, right? When you have an opportunity to build something new, which many of us don't in Evanston, where it is built out. Now is the time to think about the building envelope. How do you keep it well insulated? How do you keep it airtight? But with that comes where the technology kicks in is, you can heat this house with an air source heat pump. An all electric house no longer needs a gas furnace. You can have very comfortable living where a unit, they sit outside, the compressor sits outside, you have these wall units, or it could be ducted. It's just trickles of electricity is enough to keep the space warm. So with that technology allows us to do an all electric system. We wouldn't need to pull, natural gas line all the way to the back. And also induction cooktops are, I like to say, not your grandfather's electric cooktop anymore. It's really, it heats water faster than a gas stove. And so I think those things make sustainable living more viable. And of course, with every year, those technologies become cheaper and more accessible as well.
One other thought, Dick, maybe if you want to touch on it in terms of technology that came to mind is in terms of healthy indoor air quality too. I wonder if you want to talk about energy recovery ventilators.
Yeah, ERVs, energy recovery ventilation. These are smart units that actually, it just blows my mind. Right? It just sits in the house. It replenishes the stale indoor air. On a hot day like today, my air conditioning is on, but I don't want to open the windows. But this ERV would say, yeah, just replenish the clean outdoor air, but use the cold conditioned air to warm up or cool down or dehumidify the outdoor air before putting it in here. And most residential homes just don't have that. Commercial spaces and office spaces have ventilation. But with technology, with building science, what we've learned is you want to actively ventilate so that you have clean air, you remove particulate matter, remove odor, remove carbon dioxide. So those units are especially important as you think about new construction and airtight dwelling units.
Great, that is super interesting. Thank you both for sharing. We are coming up on the hour. So Robbie, if I can just get you to one more time toggle back to the slide that has the links to where we can direct the audience. So in case you missed it, this webinar was recorded this evening and we will be posting it as soon as we can on both the City of Evanston website and on evanston.coop. So this webinar, the guidebook, and a pretty robust set of FAQs is going to be available at these links that you see right here, cityofelvanston.org/ADU and evanston.coop. And we will it'll be up within, a day or two. So with that, I think we will close this out. And I just want to give a huge thanks to Dick Coe and Robbie Marcus for your time and for partnering on this project. Thank you everyone who could attend this evening on understanding ADUs in Evanston. So again, feel free to visit our website. You can find a ton more than we were able to fit in on this webinar tonight on those resources. So thank you everyone and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.